Hello, everyone. You're probably looking at the title of this and saying, what is Ed doing? He's not usually one to jump upon a bandwagon like I think so many media outlets and all sorts of people from all over the spectrum have done in regards to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Well, you should know there are going to be no ads with this episode. In addition, there are going to be no ads on this when I turn this into a video for YouTube either. I'm not going to make 1 cent on this. This is going to be very educational, just like I think everything has been that I've done for my podcast since it started almost 10 years ago. And it comes from all of the people who are in my life, but I don't think they listen to my podcast at all, and that's fine. Nobody is obligated to listen to my podcast. And of course, there are many people who are not into true crime, not into disappearances, not into serial killers, none of it, and that's fine too. Granted, I wish the general public did take more of an interest in disappearances, not just Nancy Guthrie's, but everybody's. But that's just too much to hope for. And I take an attitude very much like former Steelers coach Mike Tomlin in that we want volunteers, not hostages, when it comes to people who take interest in the disappearances and want to help. I don't want to have anybody involved who feels like I have to be here. We have to be here. But what has happened over the past month is people out of the woodwork who I don't think follow the podcast, follow disappearances, follow true crime, but people who know me or even really know me well, people who have known me for decades, who have never spoken to me about my podcast before, never asked me about it. I don't think they listen, but kind of just on the periphery, they know Ed does this thing with disappearances. You don't know how many of those types of people have contacted me over the past 3 weeks. It has been something more than anything that has gone on since I started Unfound way back when. This recording comes from those conversations. People who don't know a lot about disappearances, they're watching what's going on TV with all of this, and then I think they're coming to me because they know I actually do it, but I think they know me well enough to know Ed is a good guy. I trust him. I don't exactly know what he's doing with that podcast and everything, but I know he's a good guy. I've known him for a long time. I respect him just as a person. Well, maybe I can get a straight story, being that he does this. Maybe he can explain it to me in a way that is understandable to me. And maybe they feel like so many people do, at least here in the United States, that the news is all skewed. And, of course, Nancy's disappearance has been sensationalized. And I think a lot of people get that feeling, but a lot of people don't have someone in their life to turn to. They don't know somebody who devotes every day to disappearances. Well, these people do. They come to me. And I've had some great conversations. I have enjoyed talking to these people so much, and not just because they respect me so much to come to me. But it's also about, they're not trying to do this, but I feel tested, and I like to be tested. I like to be tested on my knowledge of disappearances. So this gives me a chance to just off the top of my head talk to these people, answer their questions that I don't know are coming. And then me be able to think on my feet to explain what's going on as best as I can tell, and get people who don't know anything about disappearances to finally say, Oh, I get it. Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, now I see it. That you do not know the kind of joy that I get out of that. You do. I don't. There is no words in any language, any English language. That's funny. In any language that can explain that, and that we talk for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and they come away prepared. They're equipped now to watch what's going on and be able to decipher some of it. Now, I don't know what's going to come next, but now they can look at everything that they've taken into their brain so far, and I've been able to rearrange it in a way for them that it's like, oh, okay, great. And just an example of some of these people, I have my cousin, who of course I've known pretty much all my life. She contacted me. A guy who manages money for my dad and myself. I've known this guy for about a year. We were talking money for about 10 minutes, and then we talked about Nancy's disappearance and me explaining things to him for like 20, 25 minutes, even though it's really about talking money stuff. And then the guy who does the websites, theunfoundpodcast.com, and also the new website, missingpersonsconsulting.com. You should check that website out. Talking about website stuff, and then he wants to change the subject over to Nancy Guthrie. And that's fine by me. And those are only 3 people right off the top of my head that I can name. So that gave me the idea. There are a lot of people out there like that. A lot of people who don't know a lot about disappearances, are not regular listeners of my podcast. I'm not bitter. But there are a lot of people who are watching and listening to what's been going on and probably still don't understand what's going on. In addition, there's probably a lot of people out there who think they know what's going on, but because of the way the media, and let's just say true crime podcasts and other type of podcasts that have jumped on the bandwagon, they're not doing it right either. So this is my opportunity to get to those people too. And if I can put this in a nutshell, and I'm using, I don't have a script for this recording that I'm doing on February 26th of 2026. I just have some notes in front of me. I guess what I'm saying here is, I think all you true crime enthusiasts, especially people who take an interest in disappearances, are going to certainly find this informative. You're going to get something out of it. But this is really for those people who, when they are asked to name missing persons, the only names that come to mind are Amelia Earhart, Jimmy Hoffa, and maybe those few cases that have happened local to where they live. And maybe since I'm from Western Pennsylvania, a good example of that might be Sherry Mahan. I believe a lot of people who grew up with me don't know a lot about disappearances. Well, I know Amelia Earhart, I know Jimmy Hoffa, I don't know many others. But if you say to them, you remember Sherry Mahan, oh, right, that one too, yeah, right. But you ask them about any disappearances that happened outside of Western Pennsylvania, even if you just go into Ohio or West Virginia, probably don't know about them. Not blaming them. It's fine. I'm doing my best out here to inform everybody. That's fine. They have their own lives to lead. So this is really for them. And so I'm keeping this very straightforward. I'm not going to name a lot of other disappearances that are similar to Nancy's where I get my knowledge. I'm just going to try to keep this as simple as possible, although I don't know how short it's going to be. But if you're wondering, if you really, really don't know who I am, it's totally fine. I'll just give you my very, very short resume. I've covered about 400 disappearances for my podcast over the past 9.5 years. When it comes to predicting disappearances that are eventually solved, I have about a 90% accuracy rate. So if you tell me about a disappearance right now and I read everything that I can about it with about 90% accuracy, I get the resolution right if if it gets resolved. Of course, that has to happen. I've worked, my work has been included in a murder trial in Colorado. I've presented my thinking on disappearances to hundreds of criminal justice majors, mainly here in Florida, but I did speak at a school in Louisiana, and my work has also been featured on TV multiple times, and I've also been invited. I didn't have to sign up. I was actually on purpose invited to appear at what they're calling Private Icon, although it really doesn't have anything to do with private investigators. It's called Private Icon. That will be in May of 2026 at Middle Tennessee State University. So I've been asked to speak there. But importantly, I have no law enforcement experience. I have never been a licensed investigator anywhere. I've not taken one class in anything concerning investigations, yet still my accuracy rate is exceptional. What does this mean? This can all be learned by anybody with the proper commitment. I want you to remember that as this recording continues. Now, a little disclaimer. Some of this is going to be the complete opposite of what your natural inclinations are. It will be the exact opposite of what the media says. Not all of it, but some of it, maybe over 50% of it. It will be the opposite of what you think you know probably just from watching CSI and NCIS, or there was even that one TV show that had to do with missing persons, fiction show like 20 years ago. What I'm going to say here is going to be opposite of a lot of that. I am going to give you the reality of what goes on with disappearances using Nancy Guthrie's disappearance as a template. Okay, let's get started. I think I have mainly 5 points that I want to make, but some of these points kind of go together from one to the next, one topic to the next, and there are even some subtopics in there, but in my notes, it's 5 main points that I want to make, and we'll see where it goes from there. But I will tell you what the first topic, where I start when I have spoken to the types of people I've already described over the last 3 weeks. Here is where I've always started. First of all, the way we understand Nancy's disappearance. And I want to remind all of you, I don't have any inside information. I'm looking at the same information all of you are. You have to understand that what appears to be Nancy's disappearance, in that somebody or multiple people maybe went into her house and took her away. This is a rare upon rare upon rare kind of disappearance. Very rare. I'm not saying I haven't covered some disappearances of people abducted from their homes. In fact, I have. But when it is an elderly person, and let's just say 65 years old and above, it is exceedingly rare. And that is how everything else needs to be viewed. What you are hearing about, the video that you're seeing of this guy going up to her door and in the video and everything else, you should automatically say, I am seeing something that is rare. Then you may be thinking, well, how do people of that age usually go missing? First of all, that age group is one of the rarest to disappear. Rarest. Just in general. But when that group, that age group, let's just say baby boomers and above, kind of that in that area, when they disappear, usually it's a walk-off. These are usually people who have some sort of mental instability, mental deficiency, whether you want to say it's dementia or Alzheimer's, or they have some sort of mental health issue, bipolar disorder, depression, things like that. That is usually why this group of people go missing. They just get up and walk out. This could be from their home. This could be if they're being cared for by one of their children. In fact, we have a disappearance here in Pinellas County right now that just happened back in December that's still unsolved, of a guy in his 80s with Alzheimer's who just walked away one morning from an apartment complex. This could also be people who are in living facilities. This is usually how this group of people disappears. I'm not saying some of them aren't murdered and taken away, but overwhelmingly it is these people. You could say committing suicide, but it's not clear a lot of these times whether they're actually trying to kill themselves or not, especially with people who have mental deficiencies, like I said, like mental disease like Alzheimer's or dementia. Do they really know what they're doing? It's hard to tell. But children get abducted from their homes. Girlfriends and wives are estranged. Recent divorcees are in the process of getting divorced. Those types of people, mainly female, get abducted from their homes. But elderly people, whether men or women, very, very rare. So what does this mean within the subject of disappearance analysis? Well, the way I look at it, my thinking is, after almost 10 years, is that when you have any kind of disappearance that seems to be rare, it's just when you start thinking back, and I, of course, know a lot of disappearances now. And when I can look at a disappearance and say, wow, that's not like anyone that I've encountered. And, of course, you have to look at the overall. You have to look at the age of the person, where it happened, what was going on in that person's life, on and on and on. There's a lot that has to be considered in your analysis. But when you have something like Nancy's disappearance, a rare kind of what we would call forced disappearance, she didn't do this on her own, it most likely means that it was a rare motive. Rare. Usually. That's where my thinking usually starts. Now, there is no black and white on this. There is no logic to this. In fact, if you use logic for any of this, you're going to be so off base. But this is where the thinking starts. Rare circumstances for a disappearance, a rare type of victim. It has to be something really unique that is going on here. It's very important. That is the main point. If you take nothing away from this recording, take that away. That this is rare, and meaning whatever the motive is, it is rare. That takes me to point number 2. Point number 2 kind of has to do with point number 1, motive. With over maybe the last week to 10 days, the B word has come up. Burglary. So this is a burglary gone wrong, allegedly. They're taking a look at that. Here's what you need to understand that. Burglaries, and I'm an American. I live in Clearwater Beach, Florida. And really, when I do any analysis, I stick to my country, although I have featured disappearances in Canada and off the North American continent as well. But most of the disappearances that I featured have happened within the United States, even going way back to the 1940s. But I always make clear, I'm an American. I look at it from my culture, and I really try to stay in my lane, even though I do feature disappearances from elsewhere. But in the United States, burglaries being mixed with disappearances is just not a thing. It's just not. Now, you don't need to be a missing persons expert or even take an interest in true crime to know that burglaries are happening all over the United States. Common. lots of people's cars, apartments, condos, houses, beach houses. I mean, pick one. All sorts of burglaries happening all over the United States. But disappearances rarely happen during the course of them. Even if, now, of course, burglary, the idea, of course, somebody's breaking into a house when the homeowner, the resident, isn't there. But even in situations where maybe they don't care, maybe the burglar doesn't care, and I realize legally there's a difference between burglary and robbery, I know. But somebody breaking into somebody's house and then suddenly figuring out, oh, the homeowner is there, it just still does not result in that homeowner, that resident being taken. It just doesn't. Now, very sadly, sometimes it means that that resident or the residents are murdered. That can happen. That, though, is way more likely than a burglar, one person, 10 people together, taking the people who live there. It's much more likely that the residents are going to be murdered than anything else. Now, usually what happens is the burglar finds out, oh, they're here, and just gets the heck out. Or maybe the resident beats the burglar up or shoots the burglar. That happens too. But of all choices that you can think of, the scenarios, the one that is the least likely is the burglar taking the human away. Now, do animals get taken away? Do dogs get taken away? Do snakes get taken away? Do birds get taken away? Sometimes. That's way more likely than a human being taken away. It just is. And then, of course, like I've already explained, you start mixing in it. She was she was in her 80s. My dad's 89, so it's all relative. She's 84. It even gets even rarer. This is the kind of territory that we're discussing here. Also, what you need to consider, so I guess what I'm saying is, to me, looking at the stats, this was not a failed burglary. Now, what about it? Was it a ransom plan? I'll get to that. But if this was actually a burglary gone wrong and the burglar took Nancy, it just doesn't seem very likely. And plus, on top of that, from the video, we saw that the guy had a gun. The question is, was it a real gun? You don't realize, unless you take an interest in it like I do, when you start watching these videos on YouTube from stick-ups of 7-Elevens and things like that, you don't realize how many of those guns you see those criminals using, the guns aren't real. Or they're like BB guns or something. Have they determined what kind of gun that guy had? Is it real? Is it a Glock? Is it a Beretta? Or was it just a plastic play gun? I haven't heard anything about that. But what I'm saying is, if it was a real gun and she caught him in the act for a burglary, why didn't he shoot her? I mean, why bring the gun? See what I'm saying? So, you should also know when it comes to burglaries, you should also be suspicious in that the burglary word, the idea didn't come up until a couple weeks into this. Why? It would have been very obvious from the beginning that this was a burglary. It would have been very, very obvious, and I think they would have said that from the beginning. It was a botched burglary, and she got taken, even though I know that's rarely happens. But if they mention it right from the beginning, okay, well, I guess it's something rare then. But they didn't, and so the burglary word being thrown out 2 weeks in tells me that they're guessing. They're a little stuck, and I'll get to the police, and that's also going to be another topic. But the telltale sign that this is probably not a burglary is for two reasons. One, burglaries and disappearances don't go together. In addition, the burglary wasn't mentioned till a couple weeks later. It would be obvious. They go in there. There's a safe that's been opened. the jewelry box is open. Of course, Nancy's family's already involved. They'd know what's there and what's not there. It would be quickly determined if it were a burglary, and I'm pretty sure they would have said so. The authorities would have said so. They didn't. So when it comes out now, I think they're just fishing around. So the burglary topic, not solid at all. Certainly there are exceptions out there, but you should be thinking, yeah, this is probably not a burglary. Next topic, and I am very sure that this is something that I've put into the lexicon over the last 10 years. I'm not saying there haven't been studies done on it by statisticians somewhere, somebody studying criminology somewhere. And just so you know, I'm such a geek about this stuff. I've actually read a book from England about disappearances and the studies that have been done on them over there. Yes, really. But what I put into the lexicon, I think, in true crime circles is money doesn't solve disappearances. They just don't. In particular, rewards. Rewards, I'll just keep this in general, are useless. Then why do people, if they're useless, Ed, why do people keep doing them? Well, I think it's a couple things. First of all, at least here in the United States, once again, my country, my culture, the culture that I live in. Of course, many Americans remember back to the Old West, like the 1870s, 1880s, and we think of reward, a piece of paper tacked up in the saloon, Black Bart, reward $500, dead or alive. It's etched into our minds from history classes that we've taken to movies that we watch, even if it's something like Blazing Saddles or more serious films or novels, westerns and things like that. Of course, I mean, I wasn't alive back then. Was it real back then? I'm just going to say that it was. But we still think of it in those terms, and I really don't even know if that worked back then. I have no idea. I don't know if anybody's actually done a study on that, if you could even do that. But I think we're still living kind of in our minds, like looking back to that and thinking, well, we need to do that now. I think that's part of it because it's part of American culture. Is it as common in England or in France or in Germany for any sorts of crime? I don't know. But here in the United States, it's common, and it's useless. I want to say it's just about useless. It is useless. I think today the only reason that not only, but one of the other big reasons that I think people do it and families support it and they raise money and the law enforcement goes along with it, it keeps the disappearance in the news. Meaning it's a publicity stunt. It's not something that is really a problem-solving device. It's really just about media. You should know, I haven't kept the stat on Unfound's disappearances, but I'm just going to guess half. So about 200 of the disappearances that I've featured have some reward attached to them. Why aren't those ones solved? If rewards work, why aren't those ones solved? And I think if you started going to the Charlie Project, all the disappearances that I've not gotten to yet, or NamUs, you're going to find a lot of those have a reward attached to them as well. Maybe something as low, quote unquote, low as $5,000, probably up to $100,000. Doesn't work. Jennifer Kessie, I'll name a disappearance that I've not featured yet, has a huge reward for the resolution to her disappearance for like 20 years. Hasn't worked. So when you see her family and others touting however much money it is, reward right now, and I think they also said they're going to make a donation to the NCIC or something like that, remember, rewards don't work. Now, here's the corollary to that, and that's what makes this disappearances so overtly difficult. You know what solves disappearances in the United States these days? Despite social media and GPS and tracking and phones and DNA and everything else, you know what mostly solves disappearances in the United States? Luck. Luck. It doesn't matter if it's a murder, doesn't matter if it's a suicide, doesn't matter if it's somebody who's walked off, doesn't matter if it's an accident or whatever. Most of the time, it's luck. It's not some sort of, investigation like we think of with like Sherlock Holmes or Columbo, step A, step B, follow this lead, follow this lead, boom, there you go. That rarely happens in resolving disappearances. What happens a lot more of the time? Hunter walking through the woods and coming upon remains. What's much more likely are these scuba companies, like they have their YouTube channels, just randomly going into rivers and finding cars with people in them. That's not quite luck, but it is luck in that you don't realize how many times they fail. There's no rhyme or reason to any of it. They just finally happen upon one that they guess right. They don't, although maybe sometimes they do. Most of the time, they don't show you all their failures. They just show you, oh, look at us. Look at how we're getting it done. I'm happy they're out there. I'm happy that they're doing it. But it's luck. Luck solves disappearances way more than money does. Whether you're trying to buy media time or rewards or, and I'll get into private investigators and that in a bit. But throwing money at these problems, doesn't work. And what I'm trying to do with my podcast and behind the scenes is work on a way, I know this is going to sound funny, to get luck on our side. Of course, you think that luck is uncontrollable. I would say that the reason it has been luck so far is because I don't think anybody thinks really that disappearances can be solved by any other way than luck. Even though they're going out and doing this and doing that and getting dogs out there. And there's no studies. In the United States, there really haven't been a lot of studies on what solved disappearances. What causes disappearance? All these different things, really in depth. And in addition, trying to figure out, what we have all these different technologies over the last 20 years. Why are disappearances still happening? I don't know if anybody has an answer to that. So for this section, money doesn't solve disappearances. So when you see that they've put up all this money to find Nancy Guthrie, the odds of that leading to the resolution of her disappearance, whether she's alive or dead, whether she died by accident or somebody killed her or whatever else, the odds of that money leading to that outcome is, like I said, it's useless. There is a statistical chance, but overwhelmingly, money just doesn't lead anywhere. Moving on to the next topic, but staying on the subject of money, although I'm going to use an example outside the world of money. That is ransom notes and just ransom in general. And, of course, this is something that's been on everybody's mind since the beginning, given that Nancy Guthrie is the mother of Savannah Guthrie. Did somebody take Nancy so as to extract money from her family? And I think that is an idea that is still out there, even though this burglary idea has also popped up. We have to remember that something being done as a burglary and something being done for a ransom, two different things. What I think you have to remember here is, do ransom demands happen in the United States? Do people get kidnapped for ransoms? Yes, but as I've said before, a lot about what is going on with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance is rare. Likewise, people being kidnapped in the United States for ransoms is rare. And my perception is that this used to be a thing back in the day. And in fact, you might even remember that, of all people, Frank Sinatra's own son was kidnapped for a ransom. We know about the Lindbergh baby for a ransom. And there are others. And of course, as you're already hearing, it's usually, very high profile. Now, you also might be thinking, what about John Benet Ramsey? That was a ransom note too. I think there are many circumstantial reasons to believe that ransom note was written after John Benet was already deceased. I don't consider that to be a real ransom note. And there are many others, I think, that think like I do. But if you want to get a really, really good in-depth discussion on that, go to the Consult podcast hosted by my friend Julia Cowley and her colleagues from all retired FBI. When was it? A year ago, 2 years ago or something? They did an in-depth study into John Benet Ramsey's disappearance, including the analysis of the ransom note. So they happen, but once again, rare. And dare I say that in those other situations, surely Frank Sinatra was better known at his time than Savannah Guthrie is now. I have to be honest, I didn't even know who Savannah Guthrie was until this happened. That's truth. I know, I'm living in a bubble or living under a rock. I don't know. Charles Lindbergh, surely more high profile than Savannah Guthrie. And there have been others. Now, where ransoms are much more commonly done are in some of the poorer areas of the world, where you might have a population that's very, very downtrodden, and they're desperate, and then you have a ruling class who are, I'm not here to get into politics. I know some people think of the United States that way. But I'm talking in places where a multitude of the population don't have electricity, they don't have running water. These can be desperate people. And then you have these really rich people living behind high walls and electric fences and things. And, family members, extended family members will get kidnapped for money. This is much more common outside the United States than it is inside the United States. But is it a thing? I guess overall for the world, yes, but not so much for the United States, although it has happened. My perception, though, is this is usually done against people who are way higher in profile than Savannah Guthrie. In addition, what I think, I haven't seen any of these ransom notes. I've heard about them and everything else. Like I said, I don't know about any of this just factually as a citizen of the United States, as a human. As far as the information goes, just the hard information, I don't have any more information, factual information than anybody else does. I just have experience in this area. But the other thing that strikes me about the ransom demands is that, like I said, I was going to go outside the realm of money and everything. Look at, I'm sure this is somebody you've heard of, and you really should see the movie Zodiac, even though it gets a lot of facts wrong, but it's still a great movie. The Zodiac Killer. Now, he didn't send ransom demands, but he did send letters, of course, with those puzzles, the cryptograms, and had people, try to decipher them, which they did eventually. What was the main thing about the Zodiac Killer's letters? The main thing is he wanted the police and the media to know, yes, I am the real killer. This is not a put on. This is not a fake. This is not a scam. I am the real killer. Now, how did the Zodiac killer do that? He wrote down things about the murders that only the investigation knew. This is private information, for example, like the kind of ammo used. And then, very famously, he killed that taxi driver, cut off part of the guy's shirt or jacket, and then cut that piece up and mailed it to the newspaper, the variety newspapers, and I think maybe the police too, proving I was there, I killed the taxi driver, I did it. Why? Because, well, he wanted to be taken seriously. He wanted to fool around with the cops and make fun of them, and so he wanted them to know, yep, I'm the serial killer, and I'm getting away with it, and you're not catching me. This is not the idea that I get in hearing about these ransom notes. Because, like I said, what's the main thing? If you want a ransom, the main way that you can control getting that ransom or not is proving you are who you say you are. If you're just going to write a very general letter, that gives the family, the police, all the reason in the world to not believe it. So these days, what would be easy to do? Include a picture of Nancy. Include a picture of what she's wearing, or something that would only be known by somebody who was in her presence now, things like that. Has any of that been done? Have any pictures of Nancy being in captivity been sent anywhere? No. Have pictures of what she was wearing been sent anywhere? No. I just don't get the idea that these ransom notes are real. I realize that TMZ and else, they're making a big deal of it, and it certainly gets them a lot of attention. But we already know, of one or two people that have been caught doing this, writing fake ransom letters. Well, it is possible that there are fakers out there who are still getting away with it and still not getting caught, and haven't gotten caught yet. Remember, a bunch of Americans every day are getting scam emails and falling for it. So, the kidnapper of Nancy, if this was a ransom plan, this person lives in the world like the rest of us, has to understand that there might be scammers, this person, however, Bitcoin or whatever it was. Don't you think this person would go out of his way or their way to make sure, we are who we say we are? These notes don't sound like that. What I'm saying is, I don't think this was a burglary. Factually, like I've already stated, burglaries and disappearances usually don't go together. In addition, these ransom notes are, if you compare them to all the ones that have been issued to the police and elsewhere over the years, decades, that were real, these don't look like those. So I think there is plenty of, once again, circumstantial evidence to think that these notes aren't real. And guess what? Being that it hasn't been paid off should also tell you something. But it doesn't seem the police and her family or whoever else think that these notes are real either. So I got to ask you then, what then is the evidence that this was a ransom plan? Just because she's the mother of somebody famous? That seems thin to me. And I should also say 400 disappearances into this podcast. We haven't had a ransom note yet. And although we haven't really featured the disappearance of anybody famous, although we did cover the disappearance of Jody Husentrut, who was locally famous in Mason City, Iowa. Everybody knew her, but she was abducted violently. No ransom note. So you might want to figure that into your calculations as well. I think this also shows why. I'm just doubtful this is a ransom plan either. And this is the last topic. And I think this is a good way to wrap this all up, because this is probably the most obvious thing everybody should be seeing when looking at what has been going on over the past 3 weeks. And when I say this, of course, I want Nancy Guthrie to be found alive tonight, tomorrow at the latest. But there is nothing saying that this will be wrapped up anytime soon, whether she is alive or deceased. There's no reason to think, oh, this has to eventually be figured out within the next month or something. There is nothing that says that, but it's a good way to move into this final topic. And that is, the police know a lot less about disappearances than they will let on. And this would go for private investigators as well. Maybe I'll just start with the private investigators. Except for at the very, very beginning of me doing my work for Unfound, and I had to learn this the hard way. Since about a year into the podcast, since then, I have not recommended a private investigator to any of my guests. And when I say that, I don't mean like by name. What I've told them is never hire a private investigator ever. Ever. Zero. Zero, zero, zero. Ever. Well, even if they want to work for free, yes. Now, I realize they're independent. They're human beings. They're going to make their choices. And if some private investigator just wants to take it on by himself or herself, you can't stop somebody from doing that. But I wouldn't work with them. I've told my guests who I've gotten to know pretty well, I would not assist. I would not help them. I would not let them into your house. Nothing. They don't know anything about disappearances, but they'll try to convince these families that they do. They do. There is nothing that guarantees the resolutions to any of these disappearances. You do not know how much money my guests have spent on private investigators to get nothing. Zero. Now, why is that? My impression. First of all, just to keep this simple, they don't get any experience in this. They don't study it. They don't have 400 disappearances of experience like I do. They just don't. Private investigators are great. If you want your cheating husband followed, spectacular. If you need some other things done, whatever that could be, great. But when it comes to disappearance, if a disappearance happens in your life, do not hire a private investigator. So when you see private investigators being interviewed or their opinions out there, don't listen to them. Zero. Now, I'll even go to say some of them are con artists. Some of them. Just absolute 100% con artists. Fraudsters. What I see with them is that they take on a disappearance to get their name out there for other work that they actually can do. That's why they take on these disappearances, not because they can actually solve them. Because anybody in their right mind who would look at these cases and really, really know them knows, as I've already stated, most disappearances get solved by luck. My attitude after 10 years is that family and friends of the missing person are in a much better spot to solve their own disappearances than private investigators are. It's not even close. It's not even close. So you may be saying, well, how can you say that you think this could go on for a while? We have all these people, the police, private investigators. Yeah, well, for the private investigators, just staying for them for a second, they don't solve disappearances. Some of the craziest stories I've ever heard, theories about disappearances, have come from private investigators. Things that are so wild and so unlikely and so on the fringes of the bell curve, you don't even know. You don't even know how it's just like shaking my head like this is crazy. But they're good talkers. They're like used car salesmen. They have a lot of experience in this area. They know how to talk the talk. They don't know how to walk the walk. And, I mean, there are reasons people buy, bad cars every day. It's the same thing. It's people really good at telling a story. And I have to come in and tell these families, yeah, you shouldn't have did that. I'll give you a perfect example. Of course, it's just anecdotal. I got to know a private investigator early on. And then a guest for a disappearance like a year down the road. This woman was thinking about getting one, and this is before I developed this attitude. I said, well, I know this private investigator. I'll get him in touch with you. I just went about my business. And a while later, I don't remember if it was a month later, 6 months later, I don't remember. I ended up talking to this guest. And she said, oh, yeah, he contacted me. Yeah, and all he did was try to get a date with me. Now, I wasn't there, and that's why I'm not mentioning any names or anything. But I got to know this guest. I never met her in person. But I got to know her fairly well, and I featured her disappearance on the podcast. That's what she told me. And that was just the beginning of me learning about private investigators. I also think when it comes to private investigators that too many of them get into it because they think they're going to be Magnum PI. They're going to get to live in some mansion and cruise around in a Ferrari or whatever private investigators have, been covered on TV shows, I guess, in movies too. They think that it's like that. It's not. Now, why they would think that, I don't know. I'm a grown man. I'm 55 years old. I don't even before I got into doing this podcast, I think that I knew that private investigators in real life are really not what is in TV and the movies. But you get that idea when you look at, like I said, looking at from my standpoint, just focusing on disappearances, you start wondering why these people got into this at all. And a lot of them act as if they are on it. They dress like it. They talk like it, as if they're in a TV show. Like it's their own personal reality show. So when you see private investigators, if they're being interviewed, somehow they're getting tracked down, these people are really, really, really good at getting attention for themselves. The most dangerous place in the world is the spot between a private investigator and a microphone or a camera. Don't listen to any of that. They don't know what they're talking about. Like I said, I have heard some of the craziest stories from them. Like I said, I'm just don't want to mention any names. You'll just have to believe me. Now, as far as the police, a good example that they don't know what they're doing is what we saw, about a week and a half ago, where it was this big hubbub and somebody got handcuffed 2 miles away, and they're questioning, oh, this is it. We're going to do a press conference. They're going to be this big announcement. Then the announcement didn't happen, and the next day you find out they let these people go. Now, that is somewhat extreme. But that happens a lot in disappearances. A lot of people get arrested and then let go. I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say that it's common. But I think if you knew the rate at which that happened, And I maybe 20% or something. They're on to somebody, they interrogate somebody, charges, and then it doesn't go anywhere. We've had some disappearances, some investigations like that for disappearance that I've featured. You have to remember something. Police don't get any education regarding disappearances. When I went and have spoken at these schools in Florida and elsewhere, I am the only person who ever talked to any of those students about disappearances, ever. Anywhere. And remember, they're criminal justice majors. The only person. So, and they don't get any continuing education if these police officers have to go to take some classes or something like that after they already become police officers. Disappearances are not a part of it. Zero. In addition, what doesn't help, as much as disappearances happen, a lot of police officers, investigators could go their entire careers, 20, 25 years, and not ever have one. Still, they're important. Disappearances affect people's lives. And the police should never get away with the idea, well, this is our first disappearance, so pardon us if we fumble around for a bit. But that's what happens. Obviously, they have a lot of experience with car wrecks, with car chases, with domestic violence, dealing with people with mental health issues, stuff like that, burglaries, robberies, and maybe even the occasional murder. But when it comes to disappearances, they don't. And yes, you may see these statistics. Well, what about these hundreds of thousands of disappearances that are happening? You have to remember, most of those resolve themselves within a few days. The disappearances that I feature on my podcast are the ones that last, that go for a while. A year, 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, 70 years. Those are the ones that don't resolve so quickly. So I don't want you to look at the police and what they're doing here. It's like, well, the police are on it. Yeah. Here's what I've told people, my guests and the audience of my podcast. After about a week, police are out of ideas. Anything after that is taking shots in the dark. You're there. To visualize they're in a dark warehouse, and an officer is in the center of this warehouse, and it's all dark, can't see it, and the investigators just shooting the gun in all directions, and the suspect, if the disappearance even has a suspect, the perpetrator, the cop's just shooting in a variety of directions randomly, hoping he's going to hit the suspect. That's what it's like now. And this is why I say most disappearances get solved by luck, not by what we would call an investigation. So this is a big problem. When it comes to disappearances, so many of my guests have been burned by the police saying, we're going to do it. We got it. We're on this. We got a suspect. We got this. We got that. Don't go to the media. We got it handled. We're going to solve this. And 20, 30, 50 years later, nothing. Common. In fact, I can name a few disappearances just off the top of my head where a family member wanted to talk to me. They went to the police. The police said, no, don't do that. We're right on the verge of something big. Guest comes back to me. I'm going to hold off. They say they're onto something. Year later, nothing. It's happened multiple times for me. And I've only been doing this for 10 years. Now, it doesn't mean, I think they do want to solve the disappearance, especially one like this. But a disappearance like this that gets so much attention exposes how much the police don't know what they're doing. But I don't want you to look, and maybe you're even sitting on your couch there and saying, man, the police really don't, man, they're really fumbling. Yeah, this is going on every day. It's not particular to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance or even Arizona. It's all over the place in the United States. It doesn't matter if it's local police, a sheriff's office, state police, and yes, the FBI. Now, you may say, well, the FBI, they're the specialists, they know all about disappearances. I'm just going to tell you what, once again, Julia Cowley told me in an interview. Was it in my interview I did with her or when she interviewed me for her podcast? I forget. She was a profiler for over 20 years with the FBI. I think she told me at most she looked at 15 disappearances. That's it. That's it. Here's what I can tell you, having worked on disappearances for almost 10 years. You don't get good at disappearances only looking at 15 case files. I answered that question last August 2025 when I was on my friend Jason Blair's podcast. He asked me, when did you start feeling comfortable about analyzing disappearances and what got you to this point where you can make such accurate predictions, 90% accuracy on these cases? I said it took me about 3 years, and I told him right around the time Steve Pankey murder of Janelle Matthews came into my life. So about 3 years, and so that would have been about 130 disappearances. Police don't get 130 disappearances of experience. In fact, if they have that much of experience, something really, really, really wild wherever they're on the beat. But as I've shown, you can learn this if you put the time in. So given that I started all of this out tonight saying this is really for the lay people, what you need to understand, and I know listeners of my podcast who tune in every week, they all know this about the police and private investigators. But for all you, private investigators don't know anything. The police don't know anything. They're just winging it. You have to think of it this way. This is kind of a way to explain this. Well, we got homicide investigations. We know they solve murders. Well, you should know the closure rate on murders in the United States is horrible. Despite DNA and everything else, it is bad. The closure rate, meaning how many murders compared to how many get solved, that percentage rate is way worse than it was when I was born in 1970. Despite DNA and GPS and video and everything. True story. But you may be thinking, well, we really have a lot of respect for homicide investigators. Yeah, me too. But when disappearances happen, what do? They automatically call in the homicide department because usually those are the most experienced investigators. Usually. The problem is that you have to think of it, the difference between a doctor that works on humans and a doctor that works on animals. And so a veterinarian. There's a difference. The advantage that the surgeon has who only works on humans, the advantage that he or she has is usually you can talk to the patient. Hey, what's hurting you? What's feeling bad? What bone got broken? What happened? Dogs and cats and animals, they don't talk. Yet somehow veterinarians figure out a way to heal them. Now, they may have owners who are there or something, but let's say it's just that the dog or cat seems to have a fever or something. Dog or cat can't talk about that. So the veterinarian has to kind of figure it out. We'll have to do this. What do we have to do this? Just can't talk to the patient and say, hey, what happened? This is the difference between a homicide investigator and a really, really, really good disappearance investigator. The homicide investigator is the human surgeon. The disappearance investigator is the veterinarian. And if you were to switch them around and say the heart surgeon has to work on a cat or dog, guess what? And figure out what's wrong with that cat or dog, that cat or dog is probably going to die. Whereas the veterinarian, if he or she is asked to work on a human, They might not know human anatomy and everything, but hey, the humans could just say, yeah, this is what the problem is. This is how you should look at homicide detectives working on disappearances. Like a heart surgeon, human heart surgeon, trying to figure out what is wrong with a dog or cat. And the odds of that going well. That's all I have for you. All you lay people out there, of course, all of you true crime enthusiasts, I hope you found this informative as well. But as this investigation continues, the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie continues. I'm going to say it again. I hope she gets found alive tonight, tomorrow at the latest. But if it doesn't happen, these are all things that you should keep in your mind as you are watching the coverage, as bad as it is. That's all I got. I'm Ed Denzel, and this has been a special episode of Unfound.